I have a confession. I used to be the kind of person who threw away old furniture the moment it started to look worn. A scratched table? Throw it out. A wobbly chair? Get a new one. A faded dresser? Replace it. I never thought twice about it. But one day, I looked at my bank statement and realized I had spent over $1,000 on furniture in just 1 year. That was insane. I decided to change my ways. Instead of buying new, I would try to restore the old pieces I already had. I had an old wooden side table that had been sitting in my garage for years. The finish was scratched, the legs were wobbly, and the top had a ring mark from a coffee cup. I had two options: throw it away and buy a new one for $100, or spend a little time and effort to bring it back to life. I chose the second option. I sanded down the entire table, applied a fresh coat of stain, and tightened the legs. The whole process took about 3 hours and cost me about $10 for the sandpaper, stain, and a new brush. When I was done, the table looked brand new. I was so proud of it that I put it in my living room. Everyone who visited complimented it. I saved $90 by restoring that table instead of buying a new one. I decided to test this restoration process on 3 other pieces of furniture: a wooden chair with a broken leg, a dresser with peeling paint, and a metal stool with rust spots. For the chair, I used wood glue to repair the leg, then sanded and repainted it. For the dresser, I stripped the old paint, sanded the wood, and applied a fresh coat of paint. For the metal stool, I sanded off the rust, applied a rust converter, and painted it with a metal primer and finish. In each case, the furniture was restored to a like-new condition for less than $20. I saved over $200 in total by restoring those 4 pieces rather than buying new ones. The process was not only money-saving, it was also incredibly satisfying. I learned that with a little patience and some basic tools, you can bring almost any piece of furniture back to life. This is not a sponsored video. I bought all the materials with my own money, and honestly, I wish I had discovered this years ago. Let me give you some context about why we throw away so much furniture. The furniture industry is built on the idea of planned obsolescence. Manufacturers design furniture to look good for a few years, but they use cheap materials and finishes that don't last. When the finish scratches or the glue fails, we're conditioned to replace it rather than repair it. But the truth is, most furniture is made of solid wood, metal, or durable plastics that can be restored with a little effort. The key is knowing the right technique for the right material. For wood, sanding and refinishing can work wonders. For metal, rust removal and repainting can make it look new. For upholstered furniture, cleaning and reupholstering can extend its life by years. I decided to test this philosophy on a piece of furniture that had been in my family for decades, an old oak chair that had been passed down from my grandmother. The chair was sturdy, but the finish was completely worn off. The seat cushion was stained, and the joints were loose. I could have thrown it away and bought a new chair for about $150. Instead, I spent a weekend restoring it. I sanded the wood, applied 2 coats of fresh stain, and finished it with a protective polyurethane. I cleaned the seat cushion with a mixture of water and vinegar, and I tightened all the joints with wood glue. The total cost was about $20. The chair looked like it had just come out of a furniture store. Not only did I save $130, but I also preserved a piece of my family's history. That was worth more than the money. I also tested the restoration process on a cheap flat-pack desk that had been damaged during a move. The desk was made of particle board with a laminate finish. The laminate had chipped in several places, and the edge was frayed. I was told that particle board could not be restored, and that I should just replace it. I decided to test that theory. I used a wood filler to patch the chipped areas, sanded them smooth, and touched up the laminate with a matching color marker. The process took about 2 hours and cost me less than $5. The desk looked as good as new. So even cheap, low-quality furniture can be restored with a little creativity. I also tested the restoration of a metal garden chair that had been left outside for years. The metal was covered in rust, and the paint was flaking off. I used a wire brush to remove the loose rust, applied a rust converter, and sprayed it with a fresh coat of outdoor paint. The chair looked like it had just been purchased from a garden store. The total cost was about $15. A new side table costs about $100. Restoring the old one cost me $10. I saved $90. A new wooden chair would have cost $150. Restoring the old one cost me $20. I saved $130. A new flat-pack desk costs about $80. Restoring the damaged one cost me $5. I saved $75. A new metal garden chair costs about $60. Restoring the old one cost me $15. I saved $45. In total, I saved $340 by restoring 4 pieces of furniture. That is a huge amount of money that I would have otherwise spent on new items. But the savings are not just financial. I also saved the furniture from ending up in a landfill. I saved myself the hassle of going to the store, researching products, and assembling new furniture. And I saved myself the guilt of being wasteful. There is also a deep sense of satisfaction that comes from restoring something with your own hands. You connect with the piece, you learn its history, you appreciate its craftsmanship. You feel like you are not just fixing furniture, you are preserving a little bit of the world. I also learned that restoration is not just about appearance. It is about strength and longevity. When you take the time to tighten joints, reinforce weak spots, and apply protective finishes, you make the furniture stronger and more durable than it was originally. The pieces I restored will now last for years, possibly decades, longer than they would have if I had just left them alone. I also learned that the materials you choose matter. Using high-quality stain and a durable top coat made a huge difference in the final look. On the metal chair, the rust converter prevented the rust from returning, and the outdoor paint protected it from the elements. On the dresser, the primer helped the new paint adhere better, and the finish was smooth and even. I also learned that patience is your best tool. Rushing the process leads to mistakes, uneven sanding, drips, or bubbles in the finish. Taking your time, allowing each coat to dry properly, and sanding between coats resulted in a professional-looking finish. I also decided to test the durability of my restored pieces. After 6 months of daily use, the side table was still solid. The stain had held up, and the finish was still glossy. The chair's leg repair was still tight, and the repainted dresser showed no signs of chipping. The metal stool had no new rust spots, and the paint was still intact. So, the restoration was not just cosmetic, it was genuinely durable. I also restored a small wooden shelf that had been damaged by water. The wood had swollen, and the finish had blistered. I sanded the damaged area, applied a wood hardener to strengthen the fibers, and then refinished it. It was as good as new. I also restored a picture frame that had lost its finish. I stripped the old finish, sanded it, and applied a new coat of varnish. It looked beautiful. I realized that the skills I was learning were transferable to many different types of projects. I also learned that restoration does not require a professional workshop or expensive tools. A few basic items, sandpaper, wood filler, paint, stain, and a brush, are enough for most projects. I found that a random orbital sander was helpful for larger surfaces, but for smaller pieces, hand sanding with a sanding block worked just as well. I also discovered that a good quality brush made a significant difference in the final finish. Cheap brushes leave streaks and bristles in the paint, while a quality brush leaves a smooth, even coat. These small details made a big difference. I also tested a few alternative techniques. I tried using a heat gun to strip old paint from the dresser. It worked well, but I had to be careful not to scorch the wood. I also tried using a chemical stripper, which was faster but required more caution and ventilation. In the end, I found that sanding was the most reliable method for most surfaces. It was slower, but it gave me more control and a better result. I also experimented with different finishes. On the side table, I used a satin polyurethane, which gave a soft, natural sheen. On the chair, I used a gloss finish, which highlighted the grain. On the metal stool, I used a matte finish, which hid imperfections. Each piece had its own personality, and the finish I chose enhanced that personality. I also learned that prepping the surface is the most important step. If you don't take the time to properly clean, sand, and prime the surface, the final result will be disappointing. I spent more time on prep work than on the actual application. But that extra time paid off. Every piece I restored looked professional and polished. I also realized that the satisfaction of restoring furniture is not just about the end result. It is about the process. There is a rhythm to sanding, a calm in painting, and a pride in seeing the transformation happen step by step. It is meditative, creative, and deeply fulfilling. I ended up restoring 5 more pieces over the next few months: a desk, a nightstand, a bookshelf, a coffee table, and a wooden stool. Each one had its own challenges, but each one taught me something new. On the nightstand, I learned how to fix a loose drawer runner. On the bookshelf, I learned how to replace a missing piece of trim. On the coffee table, I learned how to match a stain color to the existing wood. Every project was a new lesson, and every finished piece was a source of pride. Does this restoration method actually work? Yes, it works beautifully. With a little time, some basic tools, and a willingness to learn, you can restore almost any piece of furniture. Is it as easy as buying new? No, it takes time and effort, but the reward is far greater. Should you try it? If you have an old piece of furniture that you are thinking of throwing away, absolutely give it a try. Start with something simple, a side table, a chair, or a picture frame. The process is surprisingly rewarding. The most important thing I learned is that we have been conditioned to be consumers, not caretakers. We buy, use, and discard, but there is another way. We can repair, restore, and reuse. It is better for our wallets, better for the planet, and better for our souls. That is a lesson worth taking to heart. If you enjoyed this experiment and you want to see more real tests like this, you need to commit to this channel right now. Subscribe to Overlooked and hit that notification bell, because I test the hacks that nobody else dares to try, and I show you the truth, whether it works or fails. Trust me, you will not want to miss the next experiment. If you have ever restored old furniture, or if you have any other restoration hacks, let me know in the comments. I genuinely want to hear your experiences, good or bad. Thanks for watching. And remember, sometimes the best new furniture isn't new at all. It's old, just waiting for a second chance. You just have to be willing to try. See you in the next one.